The air in the Senate Banking Committee hearing room was thick with the stale scent of recycled oxygen and quiet indifference. It was late afternoon, that dead zone in the legislative day when the energy has long since bled out, leaving only the dregs of procedural duty. Senator John Kennedy, a man whose Louisiana drawl seemed to physically slow the pace of time around him, was methodically dissecting the finer points of federal insurance programs. His wire-rimmed glasses reflected the dim C-SPAN camera light, his posture one of patient endurance. The gallery was a sparse collection of staffers and a few hardy tourists who had mistaken the room for a more interesting corner of history. Reporters, slumped in their chairs, were lost in the blue glow of their phones, their expressions a mixture of boredom and resignation. The day was winding down. Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the chamber swung open with a force that sent a percussive echo through the silence. It was not an entrance. It was an arrival. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez swept into the room, not with the quiet deference of a junior congresswoman visiting a Senate hearing, but with the focused intensity of a prosecutor entering a courtroom. A ripple of energy, sharp and electric, shot through the room. Phones were instantly raised, the sleepy reporters jolting upright as if hit by a cattle prod. The few supporters scattered in the gallery broke into a sudden, sharp applause, a sound that was both a welcome and a war cry. She did not take a seat. She strode directly to the witness table, her heels clicking a rapid, angry rhythm on the marble floor. She planted her hands on the polished wood, leaning forward, her eyes locked on Kennedy. "Senator Kennedy," she began, her voice a blade honed on righteous fury, "I've been listening to you drone on about fiscal responsibility, and I have to say, the hypocrisy is breathtaking." The room held its breath. The C-SPAN cameras, once passive observers, now zoomed in, capturing the confrontation. "You sit here in your folksy down-home costume, pretending to be a guardian of the people's money, while you actively work to dismantle the lives of the very people you claim to serve." A supporter in the back shouted, "You tell him, AOC." And the chant was picked up by a few others. The digital world exploded. On Twitter, the hashtag #KennedyExposed began to bubble, fueled by a torrent of real-time outrage. Kennedy, however, remained a statue of calm. He made no sudden movements. Instead, he slowly, deliberately, reached inside his suit jacket and produced a small, folded handkerchief. With an almost theatrical lack of urgency, he removed his glasses and began to polish the lenses, his movements smooth and unhurried, as if her fiery accusation was nothing more than a minor expected interruption. The committee chairman, startled by the breach of decorum, fumbled for his gavel, tapping it weakly. "The gentlewoman from New York will state her purpose." But Ocasio-Cortez was a storm that could not be redirected. "You vote against climate action while your own state of Louisiana is swallowed by the sea. You champion tax cuts for billionaires while families in your district can't afford medicine. You speak of morality while defending a system that grinds the poor into dust." Her voice climbed with each charge, her finger now jabbing the air, a metronome marking the beat of her indignation. The reporters typed, their faces illuminated by their laptop screens, capturing every word, every nuance of the unfolding drama. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the clash of ideologies that would lead every news cycle. Your folksy charm is a mask for a deep, systemic cruelty, and you sit there polishing your glasses as if the lives you're destroying are a matter of complete indifference to you. Kennedy finished his task. He carefully folded the handkerchief, placed it back in his pocket, and settled the glasses back onto his nose. He looked at her, his gaze not angry but filled with a kind of weary academic curiosity, like a professor observing a particularly passionate but misguided student. "Are you through, Congresswoman?" he asked, his Louisiana drawl thick and smooth, the sound of sweet tea and slow-moving rivers. The simple, almost paternal question seemed to ignite her fury further. "Through. Senator, I am just getting warmed up." "Good," Kennedy said, his voice cutting through her momentum. The word was quiet, yet it landed with the weight of a judge's gavel. "Because you've made some very serious accusations here today. You've spoken a great deal about hypocrisy and who is truly serving the people." He reached down beside his chair for a simple, unmarked manila folder. The gesture was casual, almost an afterthought, but it sent a new wave of silence through the room. The reporters stopped typing and leaned in. Ocasio-Cortez's supporters, who had been cheering moments before, now watched with a flicker of uncertainty. "So since you've opened the door," Kennedy continued, his voice dropping into a more serious, deliberate register as he placed the folder on the table before him, "let's have a real conversation about it. Let's talk about what it means to serve the public versus what it means to serve one's own image." He opened the folder. "Let's start with a beautiful evening in New York City. The Met Gala. You remember that night, don't you, ma'am? The night you wore a dress that said 'Tax the Rich.'" Ocasio-Cortez's eyes narrowed, a flicker of defensive anger in them. "What does that have to do with anything?" Kennedy smiled, a slow, sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Congresswoman," he said, his voice now a soft, almost sympathetic whisper that was more chilling than any shout, "it has everything to do with everything. Smash that like button and subscribe because we are about to pull back the curtain." Kennedy clicked a small remote he held in his hand, and the large screen behind the committee members, previously dark, flickered to life. Two images appeared, stark and side by side, a diptych of modern politics. On the left, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at the Met Gala, bathed in the flashbulb glare of celebrity. She was a vision in white, the now infamous "Tax the Rich" slogan scrawled across her back in blood-red letters, a revolutionary statement piece in a sea of couture. On the right, a grainy cell phone photo of a small, cluttered apartment in the Bronx. A single mother, her face etched with exhaustion, sat at a kitchen table piled high with bills, a calculator in her hand. The contrast was a silent, brutal accusation. "I believe in specifics, Congresswoman," Kennedy began, his voice a calm, steady instrument of dissection. "So let's be very specific about the night you became a living billboard for economic justice." He clicked the remote again. A timeline materialized on the screen, each entry landing with the cold finality of a nail being hammered into a coffin. September 13th, 2021. You attend the Met Gala, an event where a single ticket costs more than the median annual income in your own district. You don't pay for this ticket. You are a guest. You wear a custom-designed gown, you carry a designer handbag, you are adorned with borrowed jewelry. You receive the services of a professional hairstylist, a makeup artist, a car service, and a luxury hotel suite for your preparations. Your partner is also provided with a tuxedo. Click. The timeline advanced. September passes. Then October, November, December, January, February. With each month that appeared on the screen, the silence in the room grew heavier. For half a year, the invoices for these services, from the dress designer to the makeup artist, remain unpaid. These are not multi-million-dollar corporations, ma'am. These are creators, artists, small business owners. Click. February 22nd, 2022, the American Accountability Foundation files a complaint. The House Ethics Committee officially opens an investigation into your attendance at the gala. Click. And then a miracle occurs. 2 days later, on February 24th, the hairstylist's invoice is suddenly paid. Click. March 16th, the makeup artist receives her payment. Click. May 10th, a full 8 months after you wore the dress, the design house finally receives a partial payment for the goods. Kennedy turned from the screen to face her directly, his expression one of polite inquiry. "One might observe a pattern here, Congresswoman. A pattern that suggests payment is not a matter of administrative priority, but a reaction to being investigated." Ocasio-Cortez's face was a mask of indignation, her voice tight. "That is a gross mischaracterization. There were procedural issues. My staff is responsible for processing these things." Kennedy's response was soft, yet it cut through her defense effortlessly. 6 months is not a procedural issue, ma'am. 6 months is a deliberate choice. And you are the head of your staff. You are the one responsible. Isn't that the standard you apply to corporate executives, that the person at the top is ultimately accountable? He clicked the remote again. The timeline vanished, replaced by a photograph of a young woman with bright, hopeful eyes standing proudly in front of a small, stylishly decorated salon in Brooklyn. "Let me introduce you to someone. This is Maya. She's a single mother with a 6-year-old son. She owns this salon. She built it from nothing, working double shifts as a waitress for 5 years. saving every dollar she could. She told my investigators that when she got the call to do hair for a congresswoman attending the Met Gala, she thought her life was about to change. It was the biggest opportunity of her career. He paused, letting the image of the hopeful young woman hang in the air. Her invoice was for $475, for hours of work, for her artistry, for the prestige of the event. $475. Another image appeared, a series of screenshots, emails, text messages, each one a polite, then increasingly desperate plea for payment. Here is the email she sent in October, Kennedy said, his voice a low, steady cadence of shame. Here is the text she sent in November. Here is the record of her call in December, which went to voicemail. Another email in January. Another call in February. His voice was devoid of anger, which made the indictment even more powerful. It was a simple recitation of facts. For 6 months, this woman, a constituent from a neighboring district, a woman you would claim to champion, was forced to beg for the money she was owed. She told my staff she had to choose between paying her salon's rent and buying her son a winter coat. She ended up taking out a high-interest payday loan to cover her business expenses. Do you have any idea what the interest rate on a loan like that is, Congresswoman? It can be over 400% annually. She paid hundreds in fees, falling deeper into debt, while you were giving speeches about fighting predatory lenders. He clicked to a new image, this one of Maya's small salon, a for rent sign now taped inside the window. She lost her dream. The cash flow crisis was too much. The debt was too deep. The dream she had poured her life into was extinguished, waiting for a payment of $475 from a congresswoman who earns $174,000 a year. Ocasio-Cortez tried to speak, her voice cracking. I was not aware, my team. Kennedy held up a hand, not to silence her, but as a gesture of finality. You are the boss, ma'am. The buck, as they say, stops with you. The gallery was utterly still. The air crackled with a new tension, not of political theater, but of profound, personal injustice. Kennedy then held up a thick, bound document, its cover bearing the official seal of the United States House of Representatives. But you don't have to take my word for it. This is the official report from the House Ethics Committee. A bipartisan committee, I might add. Shall I read their conclusion? He didn't wait for a reply. The committee finds that Representative Ocasio-Cortez's failure to pay for the goods and services in a timely manner was not an administrative oversight, but a violation of House rules. They used the word violation, ma'am. They went on to say, the evidence suggests that the representative and her staff were not responsive to the vendors, creating an appearance that the goods and services were impermissible gifts. He looked up from the report, his eyes locking onto hers. Even after the investigation began, even after you were caught, the payments you made were not for the full value. The committee determined you still owed thousands. The dress itself, the one you used to lecture the world, was valued at far more than the rental fee you eventually paid 8 months late. Your boyfriend's ticket to the gala, a gift valued at over $30,000, never paid for, never declared. He clicked to the split screen again, the glittering gala, the grim apartment. You see, Congresswoman, it's not about the money, it's about the message. You can't stand on a platform of economic justice for the little guy while simultaneously stiffing the little guy. You can't wear tax the rich on your back while accepting tens of thousands of dollars in undeclared gifts. Down in Louisiana, we have a simple phrase for that, he said, his drawl returning like a slow-acting poison. We call that talking out of both sides of your mouth. He let the silence stretch, then reached for a second, even thicker folder. But this is just about personal hypocrisy. Let's talk about something bigger. Let's talk about the time you had the chance to bring tens of thousands of jobs to your city, and you chose a Twitter victory instead. The heavy thud of the second folder landing on the table echoed in the chamber like a gavel calling a new, more serious session to order. The air, already thick with the personal drama of the Met Gala, grew denser still. This was a pivot from personal ethics to public impact, and everyone in the room felt the shift. Kennedy's demeanor changed subtly. The weary disappointment was replaced by a sharper, more focused intensity. He was no longer just a critic. He was now an advocate for the unseen victims of a political battle. Personal hypocrisy is a character flaw, Congresswoman, he stated, his voice now devoid of any sympathy. But destroying the economic futures of tens of thousands of your own constituents, that's a dereliction of duty. Before he could continue, a woman stood up in the public gallery. She was not a protester. Her posture was one of nervous resolve, not aggression. She was in her mid-40s, dressed in the simple, neat attire of someone who respects the gravity of the setting. "My name is Maria Rodriguez," she said, her voice trembling but clear, carrying across the silent room. "I live in the Bronx. I am one of your constituents, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez." The cameras swiveled, capturing her face, a portrait of quiet dignity and profound disappointment. The reporters' fingers, which had paused, began to fly across their keyboards again. "In 2018, Maria continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, "I was working 2 jobs. I was a cashier at a grocery store from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., and I cleaned offices from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. I have 3 children. I barely saw them. I was just a machine that worked and slept and worried." She looked directly at Ocasio-Cortez, who stood frozen by the witness table. When Amazon announced they were coming to Queens, it was like a light appeared in a tunnel. "I don't have a college degree, but they were hiring for thousands of jobs in logistics, fulfillment, administration. I spent weeks working on my application. I went to a workshop at the public library to improve my resume, and I got it. I received a conditional offer for a position as a logistics coordinator, set to begin when the campus opened." A tear traced a path down her cheek, but her voice did not break. The salary was $92,000 a year, with benefits. The number hung in the air, a life-altering sum that represented more than just money. It meant I could quit my second job. It meant I could be home to help my son with his homework. It meant my daughter, who is smart, who loves science, could actually think about college without worrying about burying our family in debt. It meant we could move out of our 1-bedroom apartment. It meant a life, not just a survival. She took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. "And then you killed it. You stood on television and celebrated. You called it a victory against corporate welfare. You held a party." Her voice finally cracked, a sound of pure, unadulterated heartbreak. "Where was my victory, Congresswoman? Where is the victory for my children? I am still working 2 jobs. I am more tired than ever. And the light in the tunnel is gone." She sat down, her testimony complete, leaving a void of crushing silence in her wake. The sound of a single, quiet sob could be heard from the gallery. Kennedy stood for a moment, allowing the weight of her story to settle over the room. "Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez," he said softly. "Thank you for your courage." He then turned back to the screen, his face now a mask of cold fury. A timeline appeared. November 2018. Amazon announces a deal to build a major headquarters, HQ2, in Long Island City, Queens. The project promises to create, at minimum, 25,000 high-paying jobs over 10 years, with the potential for that number to grow to 40,000. Images flashed across the screen, architectural renderings of a futuristic campus, smiling faces of diverse employees, bustling cafes and parks. The average salary for these jobs was projected to be over $150,000. These are not just jobs, they are careers. They are the kind of jobs that build a middle class, that fund retirements, that pay for college educations, that create generational wealth. Kennedy picked up a simple whiteboard marker and walked to a blank board. "Now, you and your allies loudly proclaimed that the city was giving away $3 billion to one of the world's richest corporations. Let's break that down, shall we? Because that is a fundamental, and I believe deliberate, misrepresentation of how tax incentives work." He drew a simple diagram. The $3 billion was not a check written to Amazon. It was a performance-based tax credit. This means Amazon would only receive the credit after they had created the jobs, and after the city had already collected billions in new tax revenue from those jobs and the economic activity they generated. It's like telling a salesman, after you generate $1 million in new sales, you'll get a $10,000 bonus. You haven't given him $10,000. You have incentivized him to make you $990,000 you wouldn't have had otherwise. He looked directly at Ocasio-Cortez. "You didn't save the city $3 billion. You cost the city an estimated $27 billion in new tax revenue over the next decade. You prevented that wealth from ever being created. He erased the board and wrote a single, stark phrase: the illusion of saving money. You convinced people like Maria Rodriguez that a deal that would have poured billions into her city's coffers was somehow a giveaway. It's like turning down a job that pays $100,000 a year because you don't want to pay $20,000 in taxes. You're not saving $20,000. You are left with zero. You chose zero for your city. You chose zero for Maria Rodriguez. Ocasio-Cortez finally found her voice, though it was defensive and brittle. That money should have been invested directly in the community, not given to a union-busting corporation. What money? Kennedy shot back, his gentle tone gone. What money, Congresswoman? The money didn't exist. It was a fantasy. It was the potential revenue from jobs you drove away. You can't spend money that was never earned. He clicked the remote and a video clip appeared. It was Scott Galloway, an NYU Stern professor of marketing, not a conservative pundit. The narrative that we gave Amazon $3 billion is fiction, Galloway said in the clip. What we did is we agreed to discount their taxes from $27 billion down to $24 billion, in exchange for them creating 25,000 to 40,000 high-paying jobs. The idea that we saved $3 billion is an economic fairy tale. Kennedy paused the video. An economic fairy tale, he repeated, letting the professor's words echo his own. But your fairy tale had a very real, very grim ending for tens of thousands of New Yorkers. He gestured to the gallery, where another man was now standing, his face weathered and his hands calloused, wearing the vest of a construction union foreman. Perhaps you'd like to hear another story from one of your constituents. The man in the construction vest stood with a weary solidity, as if he were carved from the same concrete and steel he worked with every day. My name is Carlos Martinez, he said, his voice a low rumble that carried the accent of a lifetime spent in New York's outer boroughs. Maria Rodriguez is my sister-in-law. I'm an iron worker, local 40. I was one of the foremen slated to work on the first phase of the Amazon campus. He held up his calloused hands. For me, this wasn't about some abstract economic theory, Congresswoman. This was about 2 years of guaranteed work, 2 years of prevailing wages, of good union benefits, of not having to worry about the next job. It was enough to finally fix the leaky roof on my mother's house in Woodside, enough to start a college fund for my daughter. He shook his head, a gesture of profound disbelief. When you and your friends celebrated on Twitter that you'd beaten Amazon, my crew and I were at a bar, not celebrating but wondering how we were going to make our mortgage payments. You didn't beat a corporation. You beat us. You beat the union guys you claimed to support. He sat down, and almost immediately, a young woman a few rows behind him rose to her feet. She looked to be in her late 20s, her expression a mixture of anger and exhaustion. Jasmine Chen, she said, her voice sharp and precise. I'm not your constituent. I was supposed to be. I was a software engineer in Austin, Texas. I was recruited by Amazon for a position at HQ2. I believed in the promise of New York. I sold my car, broke my lease, and put a down payment on an apartment in Long Island City. I shipped my entire life in boxes across the country. Her eyes bored into Ocasio-Cortez. 2 weeks after I arrived, you killed the deal. I was stranded in the most expensive city in the country with no job, no prospects, and a mountain of debt from a move that was for nothing. I slept on a friend's couch for 3 months while I burned through my savings. I'm a software engineer and I had to work as a waitress to survive. I'm back in Austin now. You didn't just kill a project. You sabotaged the lives of people who took a chance on your city. As she sat, an older man in a faded electrician's union jacket stood slowly, his joints stiff. Thomas Brennan, IBEW Local 3, 35 years in the trade. His voice was gravelly, tired. My company bid on the electrical contracts for the first phase of the Amazon buildings. We won a significant portion of that work. It was the biggest contract in our company's history. I hired 8 new apprentices, young kids from the neighborhood, kids who were desperate for a shot at a real career, a skilled trade. I took out a loan and bought new equipment, new trucks. We were ready to go. He paused, the memory clearly painful. When the deal collapsed, it was a catastrophe. I had to lay off all 8 of those kids. I had to sell the new equipment at a massive loss. The bank called my loan. I almost lost a business I had spent 30 years building. 2 of those apprentices, promising kids, left the trade completely. They're working for DoorDash now. That's the victory you gave them. A gig economy nightmare instead of a union career. One by one, a somber procession of ghosts from an alternate future stood to speak. A woman named Patricia Johnson, her voice cracking, described how she had taken out a second mortgage on her home to expand her small catering business, signing a lease on a new commercial kitchen near the proposed campus, only to declare bankruptcy 6 months later. A young man named Derek Williams, a recent computer science graduate from the City University of New York, spoke of how he had tailored his entire senior year curriculum to align with Amazon's hiring needs, only to find himself competing for a handful of low-paying tech support jobs after graduation. A landlord who had invested his life savings into renovating an apartment building, a daycare owner who had expanded her facility, a dry cleaner who had bought new machinery. All of them, big and small, had their own verse in this chorus of economic devastation. They were the invisible casualties of a war fought with hashtags and soundbites. Kennedy let their stories fill the room, a powerful, undeniable testament to the real-world consequences of political posturing. He gave their pain space to breathe, to be heard, to be recorded. When the last person had spoken, he turned back to the screen. "These are not anecdotes, Congresswoman. This is data." He clicked the remote. A detailed economic impact study from researchers at Cornell University filled the screen. Beyond the 25,000 direct jobs, economists projected the creation of at least 15,000 additional indirect and induced jobs. These are the jobs for the caterers like Ms. Johnson, the electricians like Mr. Brennan, the baristas, the shopkeepers, the taxi drivers. That's a total of 40,000 families. 40,000 households whose economic security you sacrificed for a talking point. He walked back to the whiteboard and erased the previous diagram. He wrote a number, 40,000. 40,000 families. Let's assume an average family size of 3. That's 120,000 people, the population of a small city. You effectively erased a city's worth of opportunity. He looked at her, his expression grim. And for what? For a tweet. For a round of applause at a rally. Was it worth it? He clicked the remote again. The screen now showed a split image. On one side, a series of recent news headlines from Arlington, Virginia, where Amazon's other headquarters had landed. Arlington sees record job growth. Local businesses thrive amidst Amazon boom. Property values and tax revenues soar. The images showed packed restaurants, bustling streets, and new construction. On the other side of the screen, recent photos from Long Island City. For lease signs hanging in empty storefronts, shuttered diners, a sense of stagnation and decay. "This is the tale of 2 cities, Kennedy said, his voice low and heavy. The city that embraced opportunity and the city whose opportunity was stolen by its own representatives. Virginia got the jobs. Virginia got the tax revenue. Virginia got the future that should have belonged to New York, and your district got empty storefronts and broken dreams." He closed the folder with a quiet finality. But at least the Amazon decision only destroyed jobs that hadn't been created yet. Your signature legislative proposal, the one you champion as the future of our nation, would destroy millions of jobs that already exist. He reached for the third and thickest folder. "So let's talk about your Green New Deal." The atmosphere in the hearing room shifted once more. The raw, personal pain of the Amazon testimony gave way to a colder, more analytical dread. Kennedy opened the third folder, and the sheer thickness of the documents within seemed to cast a shadow over the table. This was not about a single event or a single politician's hypocrisy. This was about a blueprint for the entire nation's future. "The Green New Deal," Kennedy began, his voice taking on the measured tone of a university lecturer. "It is, without question, your flagship policy proposal. You present it as a moral and economic imperative, a plan to save the planet while creating millions of high-paying jobs. It is a vision of a utopian future." He paused, letting the description hang in the air before puncturing it. "It is also, according to virtually every independent economic analysis, a recipe for national economic suicide. He clicked his remote. The screen filled with the ambitious, sweeping goals pulled directly from the text of the Green New Deal resolution. "Let's review the promises," he said, reading them aloud. "Achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions through a 10-year national mobilization. Meeting 100% of the power demand in the United States through clean, renewable, and zero-emission energy sources. Upgrading every single residential and industrial building in the country for maximal energy efficiency. Eliminating pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from all manufacturing and agriculture. Overhauling the entire national transportation system to eliminate reliance on fossil fuels." He stopped reading and looked out at the silent room. "And woven into this are promises for a federal jobs guarantee, universal health care, and universal basic income. It is less a climate plan and more a complete restructuring of the American economy and society." Kennedy gestured to the thick stack of papers he had taken from the folder. "We don't have to guess what this would cost. Numerous economic organizations from across the political spectrum have attempted to model the price tag. The estimates vary, but they all fall within a truly staggering range, between $51 and $93 trillion over the first decade." He walked to the whiteboard, the marker squeaking as he wrote the number, $93 trillion. "Let me put this number in perspective for everyone," he said, turning to face the gallery. "The entire annual budget of the United States federal government, everything we spend on the military, on Social Security, on Medicare, on roads, on education, everything, is around $6 trillion. Your plan calls for spending on the low end, an amount roughly equal to the entire federal budget every single year for 10 years. On the high end, it's more than the entire projected GDP of the country. It's like a family that earns $60,000 a year announcing a plan to spend $600,000 a year every year for a decade. It is not a plan, it is a fantasy." Ocasio-Cortez, who had been silent, interjected, "It's an investment. The cost of inaction is far greater." "An investment implies a return," Kennedy countered smoothly. "A fantasy implies a collapse. Let's look at the projected return on your $93 trillion investment." He pulled up a slide from a study by the Heritage Foundation, which used the same macroeconomic models employed by the Congressional Budget Office. "Here is what the models predict would happen if we even attempted to implement this. By the year 2040, the economy would shed over 1-2 million jobs. Not create, Congresswoman. Lose. The average American family of 4 would see their income fall by more than $8,000 per year, every year. The total loss to the U.S. economy would be over $15 trillion. It would trigger a depression deeper than anything this country has ever seen." He clicked to a new slide, this one showing a map of the United States, with states like Texas, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, and his own state of Louisiana highlighted in red. "Your plan calls for the complete elimination of the fossil fuel industry. In Louisiana alone, the oil and gas industry supports over 250,000 jobs. These are not minimum wage jobs. These are skilled, high-paying careers. Men and women with high school diplomas who make $80, $90, $100,000 a year supporting their families." An image appeared on the screen, a man in a hard hat and overalls on an offshore oil rig, smiling, his face weathered by sun and sea. "This is Jake Thibodeaux from Yuma, Louisiana," Kennedy said, his voice softening. "He's 35, works a 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off schedule offshore. He makes $85,000 a year. His wife is a second-grade teacher. They have 2 kids and just bought their first home. Your plan doesn't transition Jake, it fires him, overnight. His job is gone, his family's income is cut by more than half, they lose the house. Their lives are shattered, and for what? So he can learn to code. That's not a transition plan, it's an insult." Kennedy's voice grew harder, "And it gets worse. Your plan would cause electricity prices to skyrocket. Manufacturing, which relies on affordable, abundant energy, would become impossible in the United States. Those factories wouldn't just disappear, they would move. They'd go to China, to India, to Vietnam, countries with far lower environmental standards. So your Green New Deal would have the perverse effect of destroying American manufacturing jobs while actually increasing global carbon emissions. It's a lose-lose proposition. He paused, building to his final, most devastating point. But let's, for the sake of argument, say we do it. Let's say we spend the $93 trillion. We accept the new Great Depression. We tell Jake Thibodeaux and millions like him that their livelihoods are a necessary sacrifice. What do we buy for that monumental cost? He clicked to a final slide. On the vast screen, a single, tiny number appeared. 015 degrees C. That, Kennedy said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, is the projected impact on global temperatures by the year 2100 if the United States were to achieve absolute zero emissions tomorrow. Not your plan, but a complete cessation of all emissions. 1/10 of 1 degree Celsius. The silence in the room was absolute. You are proposing we burn down our own house, destroy our economy, and ruin millions of lives, not to solve the problem, but to produce a change so small it is statistically undetectable. It is the most expensive, least effective solution ever conceived. He gestured to another set of documents on the table. And here's the final irony. Over 80% of the world's solar panels are manufactured in China, often using forced labor and powered by coal. The majority of the world's lithium battery production and rare earth mineral processing, essential for your green transition, is controlled by China. Your plan isn't a Green New Deal for America, it's a Red New Deal for Beijing. You would be outsourcing our entire energy infrastructure to our primary geopolitical rival. He picked up the last and thinnest folder. But all of this, the jobs, the economics, the geopolitics, is theoretical. It's about a future you want to create. But there is one person whose suffering wasn't theoretical. One person who didn't need a $1 trillion government program, but just a few $1,000s from her own granddaughter. He opened the folder. Let's talk about your abuela. The shift in subject was palpable. A sudden, jarring zoom from the macro to the micro, from the fate of nations to the fate of one elderly woman. The air in the room, already heavy, seemed to grow thick with a sense of intimate, familial shame. Kennedy opened the final folder, and from it, he pulled a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of a tweet. He clicked his remote, and that same tweet filled the screen behind him, magnified for all to see. The image was devastating. A room in a state of near-total collapse, the ceiling caved in, debris scattered across the floor, and a single, pathetic bucket placed to catch dripping water. The text of the tweet, posted from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's own account, was displayed above it. Kennedy read it aloud, his voice a neutral vessel for the words she herself had written. Just over a week ago, my abuela fell ill. I went to Puerto Rico to see her, my first time in a year plus because of COVID. This is her home. He paused, then continued reading. Hurricane Maria relief hasn't arrived. Trump blocked relief money for PR. People are being forced to flee ancestral homes, and we need to fight for them. He looked up from the paper, his eyes finding hers across the room. You posted this on June 2nd, 2021, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico in September of 2017. That is a gap of 3 years and 9 months, nearly 4 years. He clicked the remote. A new timeline appeared on the screen, a brutal chronology of choices. September 2017, Hurricane Maria devastates Puerto Rico, destroying your grandmother's home. At this time, you are working as a bartender in New York City. Your financial means are limited. That is understandable. Click. November 2018, you are elected to the United States Congress. Your salary is now $174,000 per year, placing you in the top 5% of individual income earners in America. Click. 2019, 2020, 2021. For 3.5 years while earning this salary, you maintain 2 separate apartments in 2 of the most expensive cities in the world, Washington, D.C. and New York City. You purchase a new Tesla, a vehicle that retails for over $50,000. You post frequently on social media from expensive restaurants and attend celebrity galas in borrowed designer clothes. Click. And for all that time, for nearly 4 years, your own grandmother, your abuela, continues to live in a home with a collapsed roof, with water damage, with buckets on the floor to catch the rain. The silence in the room was profound. This was not about policy or economics. This was about family. And then, Kennedy continued, his voice laced with a cold, controlled anger, in June of 2021 you visit her. And you don't write a check. You don't hire a contractor. You take a picture. You take a picture of her suffering and you post it on the internet, not to rally help for her, but to score a political point against a former president who had been out of office for 5 months. He let that accusation hang in the air, stark and ugly. But then, Congresswoman, something remarkable happened. The American people, the very people you so often lecture, stepped in to do the job you wouldn't. He clicked the remote. The screen filled with screenshots from a GoFundMe campaign. The title read, "Help Abuela, let's repair AOC's grandmother's roof." Within hours of your tweet, Kennedy explained, a campaign was started by ordinary citizens, not by political operatives, but by regular people who were moved by the images of your grandmother's plight. Plumbers from Ohio, teachers from Texas, nurses from California, people who likely disagree with you on every political issue. They saw an elderly woman in need and they opened their wallets. The fundraising total on the screen climbed with astonishing speed. In less than 48 hours, it surpassed $100,000. Donations poured in, most of them small amounts, $20, $50, $100. $100,000, Kennedy repeated. Enough to fix her roof 10 times over, a spontaneous, beautiful act of human decency and charity. He then pulled up another document, a printout of a news article. And what was your response to this outpouring of generosity? Did you thank these Americans? Did you accept the funds to finally make your grandmother's home livable? He read from the article, quoting a statement from Ocasio-Cortez's spokesperson. "We are not accepting any donations. We will not be accepting any money from right-wing activists." Kennedy looked up, his face a mask of disbelief. "Right-wing activists," he said, the words dripping with contempt. "That's what you called them. That's how you dismissed the compassion of thousands of your fellow citizens. Because they didn't belong to your political tribe, their charity was an insult to you." He began to read the notes left by some of the donors, his voice softening with each one. Sarah from Phoenix, Arizona, donated $50. Her note said, "I'm a single mom and this is my grocery money for the week, but my own Nana lived in a home with mold and no one should have to do that." James from Seattle, Washington, donated $100. His note said, "I'm a conservative and I think AOC's policies are dangerous, but this isn't about politics. This is about an old woman who needs a roof over her head." Patricia from Boston, Massachusetts, donated $25. Her note said, "I'm on disability. This is all I can spare. Please help this woman." Kennedy looked up from the papers, his own eyes glistening slightly. "These are the people you smeared as right-wing activists. These are the people whose help was beneath you. They gave money they couldn't afford to help a woman they would never meet, simply because it was the right thing to do. And you spat on their charity. Why? Because accepting it would have ruined your story. It would have destroyed the narrative that your grandmother was a helpless victim of your political enemies. You needed her to keep suffering because her suffering was your political weapon." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, prosecutorial tone. "Let me ask you a few simple questions, Congresswoman. I'd appreciate a yes or no answer. You earn $174,000 a year, correct?" Ocasio-Cortez hesitated, her jaw tight. "Yes, but—" "Yes or no, ma'am," Kennedy insisted. "Yes. And you own a Tesla and rent 2 separate apartments, correct?" "That's a gross oversimplification. Is it a yes or is it a no?" "Yes," she bit out. "The average cost to repair a roof in Puerto Rico after the hurricane was between $8,000 and $15,000. Do you dispute that figure?" "I'm not an expert on $8,000 to $15,000, ma'am, less than 1 month of your congressional salary. Do you dispute that?" Silence. "So my final question is this," Kennedy said, his voice now echoing in the cavernous silence. "Why did you allow your own grandmother to live in squalor for nearly 4 years when you had the means to help her with less than a month's salary?" Her voice, when it came, was trembling with rage. "This is a disgusting, personal attack on my family. You made it public." Kennedy thundered, his composure finally breaking. "You put your grandmother's suffering on a global stage to use as a political cudgel. You invited the world into her broken home. So I will ask you again, why didn't you help her?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, unanswerable. Ocasio-Cortez opened her mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. The truth of the timeline, the truth of her choices, was undeniable. Kennedy clicked the remote one last time, bringing up the devastating split screen. Ocasio-Cortez, radiant and smiling at the Met Gala, next to the image of her grandmother's collapsed and ruined home. "You chose a luxury car over your grandmother's shelter," he said, his voice now a quiet summation. "You chose a political narrative over your own flesh and blood. You stood in the halls of Congress and preached about compassion while your own family lived in ruins. There is a word for that, Congresswoman, and it is the very same word you threw at me when you walked in here today: hypocrisy." Kennedy walked slowly back to the witness table, the silence in the room so complete it felt like a physical presence. He arranged the 4 folders in a neat, damning row. The Met Gala, the Amazon jobs, the Green New Deal, the grandmother, each one a chapter in a story of profound contradiction. "We have covered a great deal of ground today, Congresswoman," he began, his voice calm and measured, the tone of a prosecutor delivering his closing argument. "We have discussed your personal ethics, your economic policies, and your treatment of your own family. And when you look at all of it together, when you step back from the individual headlines and the viral moments, a clear and undeniable pattern emerges." He gestured to the row of folders, a pattern of saying one thing and doing another. He clicked his remote. The screen behind him went blank for a moment, then displayed a large, simple chart divided into 2 columns under a single, stark heading: the pattern. The left column was titled, "What Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez Says." The right column was titled, "What Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez Does." Then, line by line, the chart began to populate itself, each entry a hammer blow against her carefully constructed public image. "Says, tax the rich. Does, accepts tens of thousands in luxury gifts from the elite, fails to pay working-class vendors for months, and only settles debts after an ethics investigation is launched. Says, fight for the working class. Does, single-handedly destroys a deal that would have created 40,000 high-paying jobs for working-class families, celebrating their loss as a political victory. Says, we must guarantee economic dignity and justice for all. Does, proposes an economic plan that independent analyses show would cost millions of jobs, shrink the economy by trillions, and disproportionately harm the very blue-collar workers she claims to champion. Says, we must care for the vulnerable and our elders. Does, allows her own grandmother to live in a home with a collapsed roof for nearly 4 years while spending lavishly on a luxury car and 2 expensive apartments, then uses her grandmother's suffering as a political prop. Says, I am a champion of the people. Does, publicly insults and rejects over $100,000 in grassroots donations from ordinary Americans who wanted to help her grandmother, smearing their charity as a right-wing attack because it conflicted with her political narrative. Kennedy let the chart hang on the screen, a silent, devastating summary of the entire hearing. Every time without fail, the pattern is the same, he said, his voice low and cutting. You preach sacrifice, but you live in luxury. You demand accountability from others, but you evade responsibility for your own actions. You claim to fight for the people, but you use the people, their hopes, their struggles, even their charity, as disposable props in your own political drama. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the room before landing back on her. You came in here today and called me a relic protecting billionaires. But the evidence, Congresswoman, your own record, your own choices, your own tweets, shows that the person who consistently harms working people, the person who cozies up to the elite for personal benefit, the person who wraps herself in righteous rhetoric to conceal a core of self-interest, is you. Maria Rodriguez, the woman who had lost the Amazon job, stood up again from the gallery. Her voice was no longer trembling. It was strong, infused with a cold, hard-won clarity. I am still working 2 jobs, Congresswoman, she said, her words ringing through the chamber. My son had to drop out of community college to help pay the rent. That Amazon job, that was our one shot. You didn't just take a job from me. You took my son's future, and you called it a victory. Next to her, Carlos Martinez, the ironworker, rose. My union hall is full of guys sitting at home, waiting for the phone to ring. That campus would have been a decade of work for us, a decade of stability. You talk about supporting unions, but you took food off our tables." One by one, they stood again. The ghosts of the Amazon deal, the small business owners, the young graduates. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. Their presence, their quiet, dignified testimony was a more powerful indictment than any angry slogan. Their collective message was clear. They were the real-world cost of her political theater. Ocasio-Cortez, who had been standing rigid, finally broke. Her voice shook, not with the controlled fury of her entrance, but with a desperate, defensive tremor. "This is a coordinated, right-wing, patriarchal attack," she cried out, falling back on her familiar shield. "This is what happens when a strong woman of color dares to challenge the system. You are trying to silence me." Kennedy held up the stack of papers from his desk, the ethics reports, the economic studies, her own tweets. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cutting through her defense with surgical precision. "These are not opinions. These are not attacks. These are facts. This is the official report from the Bipartisan House Ethics Committee. This is an economic study from Cornell University. This is a screenshot of your own social media account. When the facts are inconvenient, they do not magically become a patriarchal attack. They remain facts." He gestured to the gallery. "The people in this room are not holding you accountable because of your race or your gender. They are holding you accountable because of your actions. Maria Rodriguez is a woman of color. Jessica, the hair stylist you failed to pay for 6 months, is a woman of color. This is not about identity. It is about integrity." A staffer scurried to Kennedy's side and whispered urgently in his ear, showing him a phone. Kennedy glanced at it, then looked up, a grim expression on his face. "It appears," he announced to the room, "that the hashtag AOC exposed is now the #1 trending topic in the world." Ocasio-Cortez's face went ashen. The last vestiges of her fiery defiance crumbled, replaced by the raw, panicked look of someone who has been utterly and completely unmasked. The makeup that had been so perfectly applied that morning was now smudged. Her hands were visibly shaking. The powerful, confident icon who had stormed into the room just hours before now looked small, fragile, and broken. She began, her voice barely a whisper. "I have dedicated my life to public service. I fight for—" "You fight for yourself, ma'am," Kennedy finished, his voice now softened, not with triumph but with a profound sense of pity. "That is what the evidence shows, not what I say, what your own actions demonstrate." He walked back to his seat and began to slowly, methodically organize his papers. "I take no joy in this, but you came into this hearing, a hearing where I was an invited witness on a separate matter, and you attacked my character. You called me a racist. You accused me of killing people. You made this confrontation personal." He looked directly at her, his gaze steady. "All I did was respond with the truth of your record. If that truth is fatal to your public persona, then perhaps the persona was built on a foundation of lies from the very beginning." The chairman, finally finding his voice, banged the gavel. "The committee will take a 30-minute recess." But it was too late. Ocasio-Cortez was already in motion, turning abruptly and all but fleeing the room. She pushed past the doors, her head down, a hand shielding her face from the cameras that swarmed to capture her humiliating exit. Her staff scrambled behind her, a chaotic retreat from a battle she had started and so spectacularly lost. The gallery did not erupt in cheers. It erupted in a low, shocked murmur, the sound of 1,000 private conversations starting at once, as people tried to process the political execution they had just witnessed. The hearing room may have gone into recess, but the court of public opinion had reached its verdict with brutal, breathtaking speed. The fallout was not a slow leak, but a catastrophic dam break. In the hours and days that followed, the narrative that John Kennedy had so methodically constructed during the hearing was amplified and cemented by a relentless news cycle. Each story another nail in the coffin of Alexandria, Ocasio-Cortez's carefully curated image. On CNN, a chyron blared across the bottom of the screen. AOC approval rating plummets 23 points in own district, new poll shows. The segment featured a political analyst, grim-faced, pointing to the crosstabs. Her support among the independent voters she would need for any future statewide run had evaporated. Even more devastating, her favorability among registered Democrats in her own Bronx and Queens district had taken a staggering hit, falling from the high 60s to a perilous 45%. The invincible icon was suddenly vulnerable at home. On Fox News, the lead story was a declaration of war. Primary challenger announces campaign. Time for real leadership, not Twitter performance. The challenger was Michelle Caruso Cabrera, a moderate Democrat and former business journalist. Her first campaign ad was stark and effective. It featured no slick graphics, no soaring music. It was just Maria Rodriguez, sitting in her small kitchen, telling her story about the lost Amazon job. The ad ended with Caruso Cabrera looking directly into the camera and saying, "Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez fights for Twitter followers. I'll fight for you." Early polling, once unthinkable, showed the primary race as a statistical dead heat. The New York Times ran a front-page story above the fold. Ethics Committee expands inquiry into OCASIOCWARTZ. What had begun as a narrow investigation into the Met Gala had metastasized. Anonymous sources within the committee confirmed they were now subpoenaing records related to her campaign finances, the hiring of family members by affiliated political groups, and the potential use of congressional funds for non-official purposes. The three progressive Democrats on the committee who had initially dismissed the gala story as a political stunt were now ominously silent. Politico published a piece that sent shockwaves through the progressive fundraising world. Major donors pull back support following devastating hearing. Justice Democrats, the very organization that had launched her political career, released a carefully worded statement expressing deep concern over the serious and credible allegations, and announced a reassessment of their endorsement. The Democratic Socialists of America, her ideological home, followed suit with a similarly lukewarm statement. The translation in the cold calculus of politics was clear. She was being cut loose. She was now radioactive. The Washington Post captured the mood on Capitol Hill with the headline, "A shunning on the Hill. Democrats distanced themselves from AOC." Party leadership, who had once cautiously embraced her star power, now treated her like a pariah. A video clip of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer went viral. When a reporter shouted a question about Ocasio-Cortez, Schumer simply said, "No comment," and hurried into an elevator, the closing doors a perfect metaphor for her political isolation. Whispers grew louder about her being stripped of her coveted committee assignments. The Congressional Progressive Caucus, her own tribe, issued a bland, generic statement about due process that offered no words of personal support. Meanwhile, back in New York, the local news was just as brutal. A segment on NY1 titled "Queens Business Owners to AOC, We Told You So," was particularly devastating. It featured the owner of the catering company who had gone bankrupt, the electrician who had to sell his equipment, and the coffee shop owner whose business was barely surviving. They weren't angry anymore. They were vindicated and heartbroken. The reporter didn't need to editorialize. The backdrop of empty storefronts in Long Island City told the entire story. In his quiet, unassuming office back in Baton Rouge, John Kennedy watched the coverage with his chief of staff, Michael. There was no hint of triumph on his face, only a deep, weary sadness. "Senator, every network wants you," Michael said, holding up a phone buzzing with requests. "Hannity, Maddow, the Sunday shows. They all want the exclusive." Kennedy shook his head firmly. "No interviews, Michael, cancel them all." He picked up a framed photo from his desk. It wasn't of his family, but of a small, failed community bank in rural Louisiana, a casualty of the 2008 financial crisis. "This was never about winning a news cycle," he said quietly. "It was about a fundamental dishonesty that has infected our politics. It's about politicians who are more interested in building a brand than in helping their constituents. There's no victory lap for exposing that. It's just a sad necessity." He put the photo down and looked out the window at the Louisiana State Capitol building. "What gets me," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "is the waste." She had it all. The energy, the platform, a genuine connection with young people. She could have been a truly transformational voice for her community. She could have actually helped the people she claimed to represent. He sighed. Instead, she chose to be a celebrity. She got addicted to the applause, to the outrage, to the clicks, and she forgot who she was supposed to be serving. Michael nodded. "The media is painting you as a giant killer, Senator." "I'm not," Kennedy said, turning from the window. I'm just a guy from Louisiana who believes your words ought to match your actions. That shouldn't make you a giant killer. That should make you a public servant." He walked over to a bookshelf lined with binders full of constituent casework. He pulled one out at random and opened it. "This," he said, "is a letter from a shrimp fisherman in Plaquemines Parish whose business was getting destroyed by federal regulations. We worked with him for 6 months to get him an exemption. That's the job, not the cable news hits, not the Twitter fights. This." He tapped the letter. "Helping this guy, that's the whole point." He looked at his chief of staff. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lost sight of that, or maybe she never understood it in the first place. And now she's facing the consequences. "Set up a meeting with the State Banking Commission. I have an idea for a new bill on predatory lending." Michael nodded and left the room. Kennedy sat alone, the setting sun casting long shadows across his office. He thought of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, somewhere in New York or D.C., her world collapsing around her. He felt no schadenfreude, only a profound sense of tragedy for a promise that had been so thoroughly and so publicly squandered. The sun bled across the Louisiana sky, painting the horizon in fiery shades of orange and purple, a daily masterpiece that paid no mind to the transient dramas of Washington, D.C. John Kennedy remained in his office long after his staff had gone home, the quiet hum of the building a welcome respite from the storm he had unleashed. His phone buzzed on the desk, a text from his wife. "Saw the news, are you okay?" He smiled, a genuine, tired smile. He typed back a simple reply, "Fine, home soon, gumbo's on." The response came instantly, always. That was the anchor, that was the reality. No matter the political earthquakes that shook the Capitol, there was always gumbo at home. There was always something solid, something real, something that could not be spun or hashtagged. His thoughts drifted back to the people in that hearing room. Not to Ocasio-Cortez, but to the others. He thought of Maria Rodriguez, her face a mask of exhausted resilience, still working 2 jobs, her son's college dreams deferred. He thought of Carlos Martinez, the ironworker, his powerful hands now idle. He thought of Jasmine Chen, the young engineer, her New York dream turning into a nightmare of debt and dislocation. They were the ones who had truly been betrayed, their lives collateral damage in a war for retweets. He made a mental note, scribbling on a legal pad. Follow-up, Maria R. Bronx. Job training programs, housing assistance. It wouldn't give her back the Amazon career, the life-altering opportunity that had been snatched away, but it was something. It was the real work. Not the televised takedowns, not the soaring speeches, but the quiet, unglamorous, person-by-person work of trying to mend the cracks. That was the job of a senator, a job he felt many in Washington had forgotten. The door to his office creaked open, and his chief of staff, Michael, poked his head in. "Sorry to bother you, Senator, but 2 more things came in that I thought you'd want to know tonight." Kennedy looked up, gesturing for him to come in. "First," Michael said, a rare smile on his face, "that GoFundMe, the one for AOC's grandmother that she rejected. What about it?" Kennedy asked. "The organizers didn't refund the money. Their statement said that since the funds were raised to help someone in Puerto Rico suffering from hurricane damage, they would honor that intent. They worked with a local charity on the island. The money has already been used to completely repair the homes of 12 other families, including an elderly woman whose house was just a few miles from AOC's grandmother's." Kennedy leaned back in his chair and smiled for the first time that day. It was a deep, genuine smile of relief. "Well, I'll be," he said softly. "So, some good came out of this mess after all, 12 families." The decency of ordinary people, he thought, was a force more powerful and resilient than any political ideology. "What's the second thing?" "I just got off the phone with Jessica," Michael said, "the hair stylist." Kennedy leaned forward, his interest piqued. "She wanted me to pass along her thanks for telling her story. She said since the hearing, her phone hasn't stopped ringing. People saw her on the news, looked up her salon, and have been booking appointments in droves. She said she's received dozens of new clients, people driving in from other boroughs just to support her. She's already looking at hiring an assistant." Michael paused, then added, "She also said to tell you something specific. She said, 'Tell the senator that for a long time I thought the truth didn't matter anymore, that only the loud and the powerful get heard, but maybe I was wrong.'" Kennedy nodded slowly, the the words settling deep within him. "Tell her I'm glad to hear it, Michael. And tell her the truth always matters. It just has a bad habit of taking its time." After Michael left, Kennedy sat in the gathering darkness for a few more minutes, the lights of Baton Rouge beginning to twinkle outside his window. In Louisiana, politics was a full-contact sport, but it was governed by an unspoken code. You had to be able to stand by your record. You had to be able to look your neighbors in the eye at the grocery store and answer for your decisions. If you couldn't do that, you had no business holding public office. It was, at its core, that simple. But somewhere along the line, a new kind of politics had taken root, a politics of performance, where the goal was not to serve constituents but to amass followers, not to solve problems but to go viral. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was not the inventor of this new politics, but she was its most skilled practitioner. She had flown high on the updraft of social media adulation, but she had flown too close to the sun of public scrutiny, and her wings, built of rhetoric and not reality, had melted. Her career wasn't over, he knew. In the modern political landscape, there was always a path to reinvention, another act, but the illusion had been shattered. The brand had been broken. She would never again command the same uncritical adoration. Maybe, just maybe, her very public fall from grace would serve as a cautionary tale for others. A reminder that actions have consequences, that words must eventually align with deeds, and that you cannot claim to be the voice of the people while you are actively using them as stepping stones. He packed his briefcase, turned off the light, and headed for the door. The Capitol building would be there tomorrow, its dome a silent witness to the endless churn of ambition and power. The problems would still be waiting. The work would continue. But tonight, there was gumbo waiting and a life that was blessedly, beautifully real. As he walked to his car in the humid Louisiana night, his phone rang again. The caller ID showed a Washington, D.C. number, a reporter from a major newspaper. He let it go to voicemail. Some stories didn't need his commentary. They told themselves. This one was over. The Senate Banking Committee hearing room was now a ghost of its former self. The harsh television lights were gone, replaced by the dim, ambient glow of the chamber's chandeliers. The chairs were pushed back at odd angles, a silent testament to the hasty retreat and shocked conversations that had followed the recess. On the mahogany table, a few forgotten water glasses sweated onto scattered papers. Above it all, the painted portraits of past committee chairs, men and women of different eras and different parties, looked down with a stoic, unchanging dignity. They had seen giants rise and fall, reputations made and shattered, and ideologies clash like thunder. Today was just another chapter in that long, tumultuous history. On the witness table, a single, unmarked manila folder had been left behind, a relic of the day's battle. Inside were the stories that had been told and the ones that hadn't, more letters from constituents, more tales of lost jobs, broken promises, and quiet desperation. Soon, the cleaning crew would arrive, and with the quiet efficiency of those who tidy up after the powerful, they would sweep it all away. The room would be reset, the table polished, the chairs aligned, ready for tomorrow's hearing, tomorrow's drama, tomorrow's performance. But the questions raised today would linger in the air, long after the scent of floor polish had faded. How many political careers, built on the shaky foundations of social media and personal branding, could withstand the simple, brutal test of matching words to actions? How many politicians who preach sacrifice could survive a basic audit of their own lifestyle? And how long could anyone claim to be a champion for the people while their own record showed a pattern of using those very people for personal and political gain? In the gathering darkness, the portraits offered no answers. They simply watched as they had always watched, the endless, grinding cycle of American politics. They had witnessed truth and lies become hopelessly entangled, and they had seen that public reckoning, when it finally comes, is often as swift as it is merciless. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's career was not over, but it was forever altered. The armor of righteous invincibility had been pierced, and the wound would fester. She would now face a grueling primary fight not as a beloved icon, but as a compromised incumbent. The donors who had fueled her rise would now hedge their bets. The allies who had drafted off her energy would now keep a safe distance. The magic was gone. replaced by the cold, hard reality of political gravity. And somewhere in Louisiana, a senator with a slow drawl and a sharp mind was already turning his attention to the next problem. He was thinking about predatory lending rates, about community bank regulations, about the quiet, unsexy work that actually changes lives. The confrontation had never been the goal. It had been an unavoidable consequence of a direct attack. For him, the purpose of public service was not to create viral moments, but to solve real problems for real people. It was a philosophy that seemed almost quaint in the modern age, a relic from a bygone era. But as the events of the day had proven, it was a philosophy that still carried an immense and powerful weight. The sun finally set over Washington. The cameras stopped rolling. The reporters filed their last updates. The hashtags began to fade, replaced by the next fleeting outrage, the next digital storm. The great, indifferent machine of American politics ground on, already forgetting the specifics of the day's drama, but forever changed by it in small, imperceptible ways. The story was over, but the lesson remained, a stark reminder for all who seek power, that you can build a kingdom on rhetoric, but it can all be brought down by a single, inconvenient fact, that a public persona is no match for a private truth, and that ultimately, you cannot serve the people if you do not respect them enough to tell them the truth and to live by it yourself. If you believe that truth and accountability still matter, smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this story. Because in the end, the most powerful office in the nation is not the presidency or a seat in the Senate, but the office of the citizen, and it is our job to hold them all to account.